You're listening to the Bears Barroom Radio Network, and the following program is suitable for all audiences.
Paxton for three! Yeah! Yeah!
In 1993, when Chicago Bulls guard John Paxson sunk the series-winning shot in Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Mark Schanowski was there reporting. In 1988, when Michael Jordan beat Dominique Wilkins in what is considered the greatest, most controversial slam dunk duel of all time, David Schuster was there reporting.
What kind of expectations do you set for yourself individually going into year 3?
In 2010, when Derrick Rose said,
"Why can't I be the MVP of the league? Why can't I be the best player in the league? I don't see why. Why can't I do that?"
It was Mark Schanowski who asked the question.
It is my distinct honor to present the 2010-2011 NBA Most Valuable Player Award to Derrick Rose of the Chicago Bulls.
In 2011, when Rose accepted the Most Valuable Player Award to become the youngest MVP in the history of the league, David Schuster was there reporting. Schanowski, Schuster, two of Chicago's most accomplished NBA reporters. This is Sharpshooters.
Welcome into the very, very first episode of Sharpshooters. I am David Schuster, and he is Mark Schanowski. And Mark, I love that open. God, I forgot how old I am.
That means we're accomplished or we're just old. But we have been to a lot of milestone moments in Bulls history. We've been through all the coaching changes, all the draft picks, all the trades and free agent signings. We heard the explanations, some good, some we kind of rolled our eyes at. And right now we're at a point in the Bulls history where they're at another crossroads with a new front office.
Well, we're going to certainly talk a lot of Bulls, of course. We're going to talk NBA. We're going to talk basketball in general. And Mark, I have always, and I mean this sincerely, I have always loved talking basketball with you because you're a fellow basketball junkie like I am. And you and I think almost 24/7 could watch basketball in some capacity. And it's not just the pro game. I mean, I get off on the college game. I've got off on really good even WNBA. I'm serious when I say this. I mean, a lot of people say, you like women's basketball? Well, not as much as obviously as, men's basketball, but I appreciate basketball in general, so I love talking about that. And, we're talking about history. I'm just thinking about all the Bulls history. I'm thinking about all those Christmas Eve press conferences when the Bulls actually fired coaches. So, yeah, we've accomplished a lot over the years.
Hey, we might have another one coming up this year. Who knows? But, yeah, there's been a lot of strange moments in Bulls history, and obviously, we were there for the high points when the Bulls won 6 championships in the Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen era. And those years went by so quickly. It seemed like one ran into the next. It was time to go back to training camp and see what they could accomplish. And you always wondered, was there a team good enough to knock off Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen off that throne? And nobody could do it. The Knicks for a while looked like they were a threat. They went up 2-0 in the 93 Eastern Conference Finals. Indiana almost took them out in 98. And a number of teams in the West thought they had a chance against the Bulls. Utah was probably the favorite in that last go-round in 98. But every time, this is why I've always maintained Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. Undefeated in the finals, took on all challengers, and even when it looked bad, he would always find a way to rise his game and lift up his teammates, and they won every series. 6-0 in the finals. LeBron, there's nothing you can say about that. You're 3-6.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll find some disagreement along the way as we continue with these podcasts. And by the way, I'm going to tease a little bit. We're going to have some really good guests on these podcasts. I'm sure we'll hear from Stacy. I'm sure we'll hear from Kendall. Who knows? Maybe we'll get a John Paxson or somebody else of that ilk on at some juncture as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun doing this. But again, we'll find some disagreement along the way. That's just normal. We will not disagree on what you just said. Michael Jordan is the greatest athlete, certainly basketball player, that I'll ever hope to be around. I not only watched him up close and personal, but I listened to him being at courtside. I heard what he was saying, trash talking,
sure.
and he backed up everything he ever said, like right in front of me. Yeah, there's no question. He's the greatest basketball player I'll ever hope to see.
That was one of the things that really came across in the Last Dance documentary, just his passion for winning, and you saw him get emotional when he was being interviewed talking about what made him tick as a player, that he would win at all costs, and if you couldn't handle that, then you can't be my teammate. And there were some comical things along the way where he would ride poor Scott Burrell, who was just along for that one season, the last championship season, and he had the fights with Will Perdue and Steve Kerr in practice. He just was driven at such a level that I don't know if we've ever seen it from any athlete in any sport. And it came through loud and clear in the documentary how much he wanted to win. And you could see the bitterness or hear it in his voice when he talked about he didn't get a chance to come back and try for that 7th championship in the 99 season.
Well, you worked with Will Perdue, of course, and Will called him, I think in the one of the episodes, he called him an asshole. And listen, Michael could be to his teammates, but I got to tell you, as being part of the media for all those years, I thought Michael Jordan was not only a superstar on the court, I thought he was a superstar to me off the court as well. There was only one time during his career that I can remember where he just said F you to the media, and that was when, he went to the casinos in Atlantic City, and it was during the Knicks series, and he took 2 or 3 days off from the media, and it was mostly because of the New York media, to be honest with you, that was all over him. But after that, he was right back in the saddle talking to the media, and there wasn't another athlete in my lifetime that I saw get barraged, at least post-game, like Michael Jordan did. He would stand there, and he was always immaculately dressed, of course,
right.
And he would wave after wave, inane after inane question thrown at him, and after a while, maybe he'd get a little bit sarcastic. I mean, how can you not? But he would always answer every question, and one specific time, and this is probably very early in his professional career, I remember the Bulls and the Lakers, this is all at the old Chicago Stadium, and I got stuck, waiting for Kareem on the other side, and I was there for forever, and it was about an hour after the game now. I'm running across the way in the old Chicago Stadium to talk to Michael, hoping that he's still there. Well, he had his suit and everything, and his over his shoulder, and he was walking out of the building. He had his gym bag, and he sees me, and he goes, "Do you need me for a couple minutes?" And I said, "God, Michael, yeah, if you can." He put his bag down and everything, and he gave me a 2 or 3 minute interview, which is all I needed. And I just thought, my God, you're a prince. Now again, if he was in today's NBA with all the social media and everybody with cameras and all that kind of nonsense, he might not be the same way. But I just thought he was such a prince during his NBA career.
Yeah, he was great to work with in terms of a media standpoint, but it's funny you mentioned the 93 gambling controversy when he went to Atlantic City with his father, and you talk about the New York media. Well, I was working at Channel 7 at the time, and Channel 7 decided to unleash Chuck Gowdy on that story. So Chuck Gowdy was in the Berto Center with all the rest of the normal sports reporters trying to get to the inside story on the gambling controversy surrounding Michael Jordan, and I think that was the thing that really rubbed him the wrong way. I think every affiliate sent a news reporter out there to try to get information and get to the bottom of this whole controversy. And there were 2 phases of Michael's career. It was before his father was murdered and after. And afterwards, I thought he was a lot more guarded. You remember before that, you could go to Michael before a game, sit down at his locker and talk about anything, if he had the time. He was almost always accessible in the locker room before games. Afterwards, he had security around him at all times. He was a lot more guarded in his comments, and most of the availability was press conference related. You didn't get as many chances to just sit down with him. I remember being in Sarasota, Florida. He was playing for the White Sox. We just sat down at his stall and talked about basketball because he was curious about what was going on. He had interest in all sports. He had interest in entertainment. Obviously, he has interest in politics, but he didn't really talk too much about that. And he was a fascinating guy. I mean, I really enjoyed all the interactions with him. And as I mentioned before, his father was killed. He was a lot more open to the media. Yeah,
one last thing on Michael, and then we'll move on to the rest of the NBA and the Bulls from current day. But, when he was first came to the Bulls, and we're talking, what was this, mid to late 80s, whatever it was, and I would see him out. We lived in the same locale.
You ran in the same circles is what you're saying.
Not exactly. We lived in the same locale. He was in the palatial estate. I was in a coach house.
Okay.
Or an igloo, whatever. And I would see him out periodically, very early in his tenure, at a restaurant, in the local area. And
man's got to eat.
Yeah, he's got to eat. He was with a couple of people, and then, but I never went up to him. That's just not my thing, to go up to athletes when they're out in, social settings. But I would see him the next day at practice or something like that, and he goes, I saw you last night. Why didn't you come over and say hello? I said, Michael, that's your time, which it is. I just don't want to invade your territory. Anyway, So that was really it. One last story on Michael, because Michael Jordan, like I do too, he loved to drive, and still does, I'm sure, loves to drive fast. And he had just the stable of cars.
Sure.
And so after Bulls
all with
games,
vanity license plates.
Absolutely. And the cops knew them all, by the way. Michael had all these fast cars, and he would, I would drive fast, and then all of a sudden I'd see this guy, and he drove crazy. He would weave in and out, weave in and out, weave in and out. And one time I tried to keep up with him, and that was a losing effort. I said, I can't do that because I'm going to get stopped.
You're the one,
and I'll get the ticket. He'll just sign an autograph for the cop, and he'll be on his merry way. Anyway, Michael Jordan to me has always been the greatest athlete, and someday I'll be in a nursing home and I'll just be babbling that I knew Michael Jordan. The guy will say, get some meds for this guy because he's out of his head.
And I guess it's only fitting for our first podcast we start out with memories of Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about current day, because as we are recording this, it is Tuesday morning, and the NBA, to its credit, baseball's had its problems already. I think football, you're seeing players dropping out left and right already from the upcoming training camps because of the virus. Basketball in the bubble in Orlando, which is right in the middle of the hot spot down in Florida, so far is pulling it off. Now, Lou Williams, we'll talk about him in a second, because I think that's sort of funny in a sick
loves
way.
Those wings.
Oh my God, where were you, Lou? Well, I had something to take care of at a strip club in Atlanta. Okay, whatever. But it looks like the NBA is going to pull this off, at least start it. And I guess that's to their credit.
It's remarkable, and I give all the credit to Adam Silver. He is one of the most forward-thinking commissioners in any sport at any time, and he always has the players' best interests at heart. He was not going to announce a plan until they came up with a strategy in talking with medical experts, talking with the Players Association, that everyone could be comfortable with. And to have the entire Orlando bubble tested and no positives is amazing. And when people violate the rules, as Rashawn Holmes found out when he stepped outside the boundaries to pick up some food, he got a 10-day quarantine thrown at him. They're not messing around. So guys are taking the protocol seriously. It's been really gratifying to see so far no positive tests, and it looks like we're going to get into these seeding games and on into the playoffs, and I think they will crown a champion in October. What
do you expect the quality of play? I think it's still going to be pretty damn high quality of play, because, you're talking about the best players in the world to begin with. They might have been off 3 or 4 months or however long it's been. I'm sure they were all working out, and I'm sure they were all playing basketball in their own locales, but they haven't been together as a team. So what do you expect the level of play?
I've been pleasantly surprised by what I've seen so far. The scrimmage games have been available on NBA League Pass. As we talked about, we're Hoops Junkies. We'll watch anything that's available. Right. And I have a lot of free time these days. So I've watched a lot of these scrimmage games, and I've been amazed at how well they're shooting the ball. The three-point percentage, I saw a stat yesterday on Twitter where they mentioned the fact that three-point shooting is a little bit lower in these scrimmages than it was before the stoppage in play during the regular season, but not significantly so. And I feel like the good teams still look good. I've seen Milwaukee, I've seen the Lakers, I've seen the Clippers. They're all executing well. They're running their stuff. Everybody looks to be moving well. Some of the teams that could be dark horse candidates like Toronto and Boston, they've got some formidable players that are ready to roll. I think these playoffs are going to be fascinating because no one has home court advantage.
Right.
They put the home team's signage and some of their arena sounds in there, but I don't think that's going to sway anybody when they're playing this controlled atmosphere. And I think the NBA has done a nice job. If you look at the court, the way they have things set up, it's very closed in with all the signage and the pumped in noise, that you get the feel that something special is going on. And the players, I know Kyle Korver said the shooting background is tremendous. He said it's fantastic for shooters. So we could see some really high-scoring games.
Now, when we talked a couple of weeks ago, when we were starting to talk about doing these podcasts, you thought that there might be some wild upsets. I'm quoting you right here. Are you backing off that at this juncture?
Based on what I've seen so far, I thought that some of the teams that came in as the heavy favorites, the teams I mentioned, Milwaukee, the 2 LA teams, Toronto, I thought that they may either have somebody who wasn't going to come back, or there could be an injury, or maybe just an overall drop in play that maybe in a shorter series you could see an upset. But these are going to be best-of-7 series. It's not like they're going to make it 2 out of 3 in the first round. The only gimmicky thing is the 8th-place battle, where the 8th-place team, if the 9th-place team was within 4 games games of them after the seeding, they will play a play-in round where the 8th seed only has to win once, but the 9th seed has to win twice. That's the one gimmicky thing, and I think in the Western Conference, it's going to be fascinating to see if Zion can get the Pelicans in, if Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum can get the Blazers in, because then that team would play the Lakers in the first round, and that'd be a pretty interesting series.
All right, speaking of Zion Williamson, of course, and he looks to be even in better shape than when he first came back from his injury during the quote-unquote first part of the regular season. We're going to talk about him and Ja Morant and some of the awards that are about to be, I guess, finalized. They're not going to be announced until much later on, but I think the ballots have to be in over the next day or two. But in talking about LeBron specifically, I don't know. I'm always been a believer star power wins ultimately in basketball. I mean, ultimately it does. And you know, when you talk about star power, I mean, the Lakers still have 2 of the 5 best players on the planet in their starting lineup. And the rest of the lineup isn't so horrible either. So I still give, even before the whole thing got shut down, I still thought the Lakers ultimately would win the whole thing. I still do. Do you disagree?
I like the Clippers. I think they've done a good job in building their depth, bringing in some veteran players as we approach the trade deadline back in February, and then signing some guys in free agency. You know, they've added Reggie Jackson, Marcus Morris, and our good friend Keem Noah to their bench. They're 10 deep, which I think is going to serve them well in this kind of shortened season. They're not going to stretch the playoffs out as much as they have in years past, where you have 3-day breaks between games. These games are going to come at you pretty quickly. And these guys are not going to be in 100% game shape. So I think the teams that can withstand, you know, a minor injury or just fatigue with their starting lineup, I think the Clippers are deeper. You know, LA's going to have to the Lakers are going to have to count on guys like J.R. Smith and Dion Waiters, who are 2 of the biggest wild cards that you'll ever see. Never forget J.R. Smith, of course, at the end of that first game in the finals where he didn't know what the score was. I mean, come on. So, you know, Rondo's out. You know, playoff Rondo is going to miss at least the first round. He broke his thumb again. Which, of course, doomed the Bulls a few years back.
Yep.
So I like the Clippers just a little bit over the Lakers. I think they're deeper, and that twosome of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, you know, this is the era of positionless basketball. Those guys can defend 1 through 4. They can switch on anything. Paul George had shoulder surgery last summer, and he was not 100%, you know, early in the year. I think now he's fully recovered. Kawhi had time to rest that knee that's been giving him problems. I think the Clippers might have a slight edge.
All right, well, it could be a battle of Los Angeles, at least, well, everybody thought it would be in the Western Conference. I think the Lakers handled them. What do they play? 3 times in the...
No, the Clippers, I think, won 2 out of 3.
Did they win 2 out of 3? I thought it was the other way around.
They beat them the first 2 times, and then the last time, just before the stoppage, the Lakers beat the Clippers.
All right, well, anyway, you know, you and I are both kindred on this one. I'm just looking forward to seeing some basketball, and you're right, I could watch it 24/7. I want to talk specifically about a name that you mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, Keem Noah.
He's back.
He's back. I love it. I mean, Keem Noah, I think we're both kindred on this one as well, is one of our favorites to deal with, certainly as a media member. I remember specifically there was one game where he hit a tornado shot with about 2 seconds to go, and the Bulls won the game from, you know, you won it from about 15 feet away, whatever. And no one thought he would take the shot, but he had to. There was only 2 seconds left on the clock. And I remember talking to him after the game, and I go, wow, man, you took that shot. You got balls of steel. And he was so happy that I said that. He goes, I got balls of steel. I got balls of steel. Yeah. Anyway, he was one of our favorites. If you ever wanted a great quote, if you ever wanted honesty, I mean, sometimes too much honesty, Keem Noah was front and center.
Yeah, he said a lot of funny things over the years. You know, he didn't know when it was snowing outside or didn't know it was opening day in baseball. He was kind of tunnel-visioned about things. And, you know, he told a story about how when he injured himself before the season trying to get ready to hopefully catch on with another team, he talked about cutting his Achilles. He didn't say strained or, you know, rupture or anything. So there's got to be a story behind that. You know, I don't know if he stepped into a bucket of champagne or whatever, but, you know, a fascinating character. You know, he would have some great stories about what he did in the off season, and just a free spirit. You know, his dad, of course, was a professional tennis player, and he lived a very extraordinary life as a child. I'm sure Keem did. Just a real interesting guy, but at his core, such a hard worker, and I think that's why Doc Rivers wanted to bring him in. He's not going to play much. They have, you know, Ivica Zubac is the starter, and then Montrezl Harrell, who could be 6th man of the year, is the backup center when they go small. So I don't anticipate Joe's going to play a lot. But if he could somehow get a championship ring, that'd be pretty cool for him.
Yeah, I'm happy that he's just doing what he loves to do, which is playing basketball, of course. If you'll notice, Mark, that during these podcasts, I tend to go off into tangents. And when you start talking about the injury, specifically they're stepping into a bottle of champagne or whatever, I'm just thinking about great injuries in basketball over the years. Of course, we remember when Derrick Rose, supposedly, when he was laying in bed, they had the apple peeler.
He was cutting an apple.
Yeah,
right?
he was cutting an apple, and he rolled over, and he cut himself. No, I don't know about that one. And then, of course, Carlos Boozer tripping over the, no chance that happened, by the way. I was running to the door, and all of a sudden that gym bag was right there in front.
Yeah, I don't know about guys carrying gym bags around anymore. That's what we did in the 70s,
Anyway, all right, before we got to the Bulls, we mentioned that the awards for the NBA, they're not going to be announced until much later on, but they are going to be finalized as far as tabulations over the next couple of days. We're recording this on Tuesday, so let's take our own picks, if we will. Yeah. The MVP, it's obviously a two-man race. For me, it's a one-man race. It's either Giannis or LeBron. I could see people going either way, but I think Giannis in the long run wins this award.
Yeah, and the thing that's been kind of funny is that right before the stoppage, and then even carrying into the Orlando bubble, you hear LeBron drop these comments about, no one's doing what I'm doing, and at my age, and I will give him credit for this. No NBA forward has ever led the league in assists, and he's going to do that, averaging 10 per game, and to reinvent yourself at 34, 35 years old is pretty remarkable. He's done such a good job running that team, and with Rondo out and Avery Bradley deciding not to play in the restart, he's going to be their point guard. He's going to be the guy handling the ball at crunch time, and that's going to be another challenge for him because he's going to try to get everybody else involved. We'll see how that impacts his role as their number one scorer. Is he going to just dump the ball in Anthony Davis and go run and spot up in the corner? I don't think so. So they're going to have to kind of alter their offense a little bit. He's done a remarkable job, I think, coming back of disappointment of last year when he, for the first time, missed a significant portion because of injuries, and the Lakers missed the playoffs. He was embarrassed. He was highly motivated. He's had a fantastic year, but when you look at the efficiency with which Giannis Antetokounmpo has played, averaging 30 and 14 and like 7 assists, best defensive player, you could argue, in the league, he carries that Milwaukee team. LeBron has AD. He has another top 5, top 7 player in the league. If Giannis is out, the Bucks go nowhere.
100%, and that's why I lean towards Giannis. I mean, first of all, he's just an incredible talent. I mean, his arm reach is just off the charts. And, I see him go against guys his own size, and yet, for some strange reason, he looks like he's 3 or 4 inches bigger than them because of some of the things that he does, that he's just able to... I mean, for him, it's almost like picking an apple off a tree. That's so high up there.
Some of the dunks he has, he'll make a spin move in the lane, you're thinking, well, it's a finger roll or a floater's coming. He'll just stretch that arm and somehow dunk the ball. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. We've seen a lot of great athletes over the years. We mentioned Jordan and Julius Erving and Wade going back with Elgin Baylor. Guys who were really spectacular one-on-one type players. But Giannis, he has that dimension of that length that you mentioned and those arms that just seem to extend forever that gives him a unique quality. Now, the one thing I worry about for him is that he's kind of fallen in love with the three-point shot. He's shooting a lot more of them, and people say, well, he's making whatever it is, low 30s, and they feel like that's going to open driving lanes for him. I think it's a crutch for him. He gets a little bit lazy at times, especially when he's a little bit fatigued. He'll shoot that three, and when you look at the Bucks system, remember when the Hawks won 60 games with Mike Budenholzer a few years back, and then I think they got swept by Cleveland in the playoffs. It's a good system for the regular season, but is it going to work when you're in the final 2 minutes and you're playing elite defenses who've seen everything you're running, and then they're going to tell Giannis, who's going to be fatigued, go ahead, shoot that jumper.
Yeah.
We'll see if you can make that. And that's what Toronto did last year. They cut off the driving lanes. Remember, Milwaukee won the first 2 games of the Eastern Conference Finals, lost Game 3 in double overtime, and then Giannis and the rest of the team got real tight.
Yeah, total kudos, by the way, to LeBron. I mean, he's just an incredible freak of nature in the fact that he's still at the same level and maybe even better now than he was when he first came into the league. It's just effing incredible. Yeah. That's maybe the one area where he has it over Michael, that he is aged better on the court, if you will. Michael had to take a step back a little bit towards the tail end of his career. He wasn't obviously dunking. He reinvented himself with the turnaround and everything else that went along with it. Plus, he had the drive to always win. But LeBron is still at an incredible level at whatever age he is. And leading the league in assists does not surprise me at all, because honestly, going all the way back to his high school days in Akron, Ohio, that's what his game was. I mean, he was a complete team player going all the way back with his, teammates of when he was playing in AAU and high school and everything else. So I'm not surprised that he's doing what he's still doing. The fact that he's doing it at the level that he's still doing it, and he's in such incredible shape, it blows me away at the age that he is. That sort of freaks me out. But Giannis, as you mentioned also, Mark, he's a great defender, and he takes pride in his defense, much like Michael did. And again, that's another reason why I'm leaning towards him as being the MVP.
Yeah, I heard it mentioned on one of the broadcasts this week that only 2 players have won MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season, and that was Michael and Hakeem Olajuwon. So Giannis hoping to join that group, and I know there's a pretty strong sentiment that maybe he is the Defensive Player of the Year as well as MVP. Rudy Gobert is a past winner. He'll be a candidate for that. Anthony Davis is among the leader in block shots, and he's been given a lot of credit for what the Lakers have done this year, so there'll be some sentiment that maybe AD could be the Defensive Player of the Year. But if Giannis wins both of those awards, I mean, that just raises his profile even higher. And of course, I'm a Milwaukee native, so I kind of root for the Bucks over the years. They haven't won a championship since 1971, so it's about time that maybe they get a chance. And, a lot of speculation that if they don't at least get to the finals this year, that Giannis might be looking elsewhere. He's good friends with Steph Curry and some of the Warriors. I guess he's got a good relationship with Masai Ujiri in Toronto. If they get knocked out early, that's all you're going to hear this summer and on into next season. Where is Giannis going to go next?
All right, well, you sort of beat me to the punch on this one. Is there any chance? Because by next year, when he becomes a free agent, the Bulls very likely will have a lot more money because Otto Porter Jr. will be bye-bye.
Right. Yeah.
So that's like 25 or 26 million off their cap. Is there any chance he could come 90 miles south, be in the big city, stay in the same conference, and is there any chance?
No.
Okay.
No.
At least I had to throw it out there.
I don't think so. The players have developed this networking thing where they've got their best friends around the league, and they always talk about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could play together? It's not the front offices who recruit these free agents anymore. It's the players recruiting each other. We've seen it going back to 2010 where LeBron, Wade, and Bosh decided to join forces in Miami, and it's continued all the way through. Kevin Durant joining the Warriors was a bit of a surprise, but I think that he was just cherry-picking the best situation where he could win championships. I'm not a big Kevin Durant fan. I mean, he's a fantastic player. Probably he's already inched his way into the top 20 all time. It's just a fantastic scorer at almost 7 feet and can score inside and out. But the way he's conducting his business, he used to be very media friendly. Remember when he won the MVP, his mom was there, and it was a touching moment. He gave a great speech. He was always one of the fan favorites, but now, jumping on the Warriors after Oklahoma State should have beaten them, in that playoff series the year before, and now going to Brooklyn, and he's not going to play in the restart because he wants more time. I don't know. I'm just not a big fan.
There's a terminology called big timing. I mean, we've all noticed it or had it happen to us. In his own way, it's like Kevin Durant is big timing everybody. An incredible talent, but the fact that he's not even going to try and play in this restart because he's been off for a year now since all his surgery. If he was really competitive, like you would hope he would be, you would think that he would try and get out there, at least give it a try. But he said right off the bat, I'm not doing it. So that is disappointing.
And the funny thing about it is, we remember how Derrick Rose just got crucified for not coming back in mid-season after his ACL tear. And now guys are taking a year, 18 months, and that's just normal. So I'm sure Derrick in his private moments is going, look at that guy, look what he's doing, and I got roasted for the fact that I didn't come back in half a season after I tore my ACL.
There's a song title, there's even a movie title called "Take the Money and Run." I think that was a Woody Allen something or other. Anyway, that's what happens with a lot of these guys. Coach of the Year. I mean, it's a 2-horse race in that one also, in my estimation. What do you like?
Nick Nurse has done a fantastic job. You lose the Finals MVP in Kawhi Leonard. Some people thought they might struggle to make the playoffs.
Right. I was one of those, actually.
Clearly the second-best team in the East. He's got a system that works at both ends of the floor. I think he is a remarkable coach. As I mentioned, he came up with a defensive strategy that really neutralized Giannis in last year's Eastern Conference Finals. Golden State was decimated by injuries in the NBA Finals, so I think that was I think Golden State would have won that series had everyone been healthy, but that's just looking back at in hindsight. He's done a remarkable job to have them with the second best record in the East, and really they were getting better as we got closer to the stoppage, and they still look really strong. They're deep, they're versatile. Marc Gasol lost a bunch of weight. I think he's going to be in pretty good condition coming with the restart. So I think they're going to be a team that's going to be dangerous. That potentially we could see a Toronto-Boston Eastern Conference semifinal, which would be a hell of a series. And Milwaukee may have to play Miami in the semifinals. Miami beat the Bucks twice during the regular season, and Milwaukee, for whatever reason, doesn't match up well with the Heat.
All right, how about Rookie of the Year? They came in 1-2 into the league. Zion Williamson, who unfortunately had the injury. He's just going to be a great talent for years and years and years to come. Ja Morant was number 2. I'm going to lean towards Morant only because Williamson wasn't around long enough anyway. I think Williamson was the right pick, obviously, at number 1, and I think in the long run he will be the, and that's not taking anything away from Morant because I think he's just an incredible talent. I think Williamson will be the better overall talent, down the road as long as he stays healthy, but Ja Morant is my Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, when I was working for NBC Sports Chicago, we would always do a draft night show at a local establishment, and we did one last summer, and I was kind of privately hoping the Bulls got the second pick to get Ja Morant.
He would have fit in like a glove for this team.
Zion's fantastic, and had the Bulls been lucky, which they weren't, of course, and got the first pick, you take Zion because he's a freakish athlete at that size and that ability. You can't pass up on a guy like that. But I just thought Morant, watching him play at Murray State and the amazing things he was able to do in carrying that team to the NCAA tournament and some of the individual games that he had, like you mentioned, a spectacular guard like that would have brought back days of the early Derrick Rose. Mm-hmm. And we've seen in Memphis does not have a lot of talent, and he has them in the 8th playoff position right now after they've been garbage for a number of years. So Morant's the Rookie of the Year. It definitely would have been Zion if he had played a full season. But that's going to be the question going forward with Zion. Can he stay healthy for a full season? And to his credit, he dropped some weight during the stoppage, and he came back in excellent shape.
All right, before we get to the Bulls, and certainly there's a lot to talk about the Bulls, there was a big signing. I don't even know if it's official yet, but it will be if it isn't already. Tom Thibodeau with the Knicks signing a 5-year deal. I'm going to be curious what the financial terms are because there's been a lot of stories that coaches are not going to get the money that they did in the past, but he is going to New York, and that makes a difference as well. I'm happy that Tom Thibodeau is going to be back in the league. I don't know what kind of success he will have in New York because of the roster and the ownership and everything else. But listen, he's a basketball lifer. I am happy for him. He's a nut job in a lot of ways, obviously, but I'm happy that he's back in the league.
Well, I guess the key for him is that Leon Rose used to be his agent, so maybe he'll be able to get along with the front office. He had problems in Chicago, obviously. James Dolan is one of the wacko owners who always wants to meddle and get involved, and I think that will drive Tibbs crazy. You look at the roster, I thought they did one of the worst jobs in the history of basketball in terms of constructing that roster. Would they sign like 6 power forwards and try to play them all together? Our guy Taj Gibson is over there now, and it's just a mess. They brought in all the guys that, duplication at the same position, and they thought they'd run these guys out. Of course, they drafted R.J. Barrett with the 3rd pick last year. He was kind of uneven. He's kind of a volume scorer, kind of a small forward, kind of a 2-guard. Maybe long-term he'll be a really good player. I'm not so sure. They've really struck out with every effort they've made at the point guard spot. They drafted Frank Ntilikina high. They brought in Dennis Smith in the Porzingis trade. Nothing has really worked out, and it's going to drive Tibbs crazy to see some of these young guys who can't play. He's going to try to revamp that roster, but it's going to be tough this offseason because nobody has any cap space. The salary cap's probably going to drop because of the loss of revenue with the COVID-19 crisis, and I don't think he's going to have a lot of avenues to really remold that team the way he'd like. They have some draft picks. They're going to have a high lottery pick again, and they got a couple of picks from Dallas in the Porzingis deal, but those picks aren't as good as maybe they had hoped because the Mavericks are having a good season and probably will for the next few years. So I wish him well. I like Tom. He was not the most friendly guy in terms of the media, but he was very professional in his dealings, and I thought, he worked his butt off trying to get a championship to Chicago. It just didn't work out. The Minnesota situation was troublesome in that, he traded a lot to get Jimmy Butler over there, and then Jimmy turned on him, which I thought was pretty rotten. And, so he lost his gig there, and he's been campaigning to get back ever since because he's a basketball lifer. And without having some connection to basketball in the NBA, he's kind of lost.
Two things I know about Tom Thibodeau, as you mentioned, basketball lifer. His passion for the game is just off the charts. His passion for food is also off the charts. The man loves to eat, and he loves to eat at good restaurants. So being back in New York, well, he can definitely afford it. When he was going around the country, picking the brains of all the different organizations as he was in between jobs, he was also, I'm sure, doing a tour of some of the best restaurants around the country. He loves doing that. Any favorite moments for Tom Thibodeau? Because I'll give you one right off the bat that sort of told me who we're going to deal with. And I made mention of this in a podcast with Les the other day. In the very, very, very first preseason game under Tom Thibodeau, it was 6:45 before 7:30 tip or whatever it was. We asked him, what's your starting lineup? He wouldn't tell us.
Yeah.
He wouldn't tell us the starting lineup in the very first preseason game that he ever coached. That's who he was. That's who he is. I don't think he'll ever change.
The thing that always made me laugh was, our buddy Nick Friedel, who's now out in the West Coast covering the Warriors and the Lakers and whoever else was out there. He had this love-hate relationship with Tom, and he always would know how to push Tom's button, and he always stand in the media scrum. Nick was always on the outside, and
right.
He'd ask a question, and Tom would just roll his eyes, and when he'd give one of his patented, "We have more than enough to win," you could just hear Nick in the corner go, and that always stood out to me, is that give and take. And he wasn't the only one, but some of his pet phrases,
do your job,
we let go of the rope, more than enough to win. He's coach 101 through and through, and he's a basketball lifer. I have a ton of respect for the guy. I wish him well in New York, but it's going to be an uphill climb now.
All right, from one coach to another, the Bulls are still employing, as we speak now, and I think it's going to go, through whatever next season, whenever that comes. Jim Boylan is their head coach. Are you surprised that there hasn't been a change? Will you be surprised if there is no change?
I am stunned that Arturas Karnisovas has not made a change. When he was brought in, all the beat reporters, everyone who went to the there wasn't really a news conference because we were in a quarantine, but it was a Zoom conference. But he assured everyone that he was given full autonomy to make all basketball decisions. His quote was, "I was brought in to affect change." How do you affect change when you bring in the same coaching staff that won, Jim Boylan's record, he's won 31% of his games as an NBA head coach. Not all of it's Jim's fault. Jim is, much like Tom Thibodeau, is a basketball lifer. He's a hard worker. He's been a career assistant who finally got a chance to move over and take the big chair. And you root for guys like that. You want them to do well. But the record is what it is. And when you bring in a guy, you tell him, we want to revamp the way we do things. We want you to affect change. But it'd be great if you just kept the coach who hasn't been that successful.
No logic to it at all. I mean, I don't know of anybody who's been handed the keys to the car and is basically told, well, you have to sit in the back seat. Pretty much that's what's going on here. And yes, I do know that not only does he have 2 more years left on his contract, but his top assistants also have 2 more years left on his contract. So, okay, if you want to add it all up, that's probably about, $4 or $5 million that they would have to eat if you even want to do that. But I also remember, in spite of the economic times with the pandemic of what we're going through, and the NBA will suffer a little bit. We'll talk about that in subsequent podcasts. But the Bulls are still a $3.2 billion franchise. So I'm sorry, $5 million does not equate to me. And if you're brought in to, as you said, affect change, and you always want to bring in your own guy. So I don't understand this.
Yeah, you look at the front office handbook, and the first thing is when you start, you bring in your own coaching staff to try to implement the vision that you have for the franchise. And we're sitting here in late July making some assumptions based on information that we have and people that we've talked to, but that doesn't mean that things couldn't change. Now, there is a scenario out there where maybe they're hanging on to the current coaching staff because they're waiting to see if they get a chance to have a mini camp, or maybe some regional scrimmages are being talked about. and they don't want to make a coaching change if they need a group of coaches to get this group ready for a 2.5 week period where they're going to be doing some work. And maybe Karnišović is going to look at this. He's going to get a chance to evaluate the roster, and then he'll make his decision on the coaching staff. It could be just they're going to delay until they know whether or not they're going to come back for some extended period this summer to work together. Now, devil's advocate could say, you could say, well, then why don't you give a new coach a chance to get that 2.5 weeks with the team? It just depends on how you look at it. Maybe they will make a change at some point, because the new season, the earliest it could start would be December 1st. It may get pushed into January or even February if the owners get together and say, well, until we have a vaccine, we can't put fans in the arenas. We're going to wait until we can get the fans back. So there's all kinds of scenarios that are out there that might explain why they're kind of having this status quo situation. The thing, though, that I've heard in talking to people who have very close ties to the organization is it sounds like they're leaning towards Boylan starting next season.
Yeah,
we'll see if that's the case.
And that's what I'm hearing as well. And I got to say, Mark, that the passion of the fans is just the opposite. They just don't want. And listen, I've gotten along with Jim Boylan also.
So
I've been into his office. We've had private conversations, yada, yada, yada. So I have nothing against the man. It's just that record and some of the things that he has done as head coach, it just doesn't add up for him continuing under a new administration. At least that's in my opinion. But the fan base is so against him coming back that if they do bring him back, I think they lose an opportunity. And already there's sort of like a black mark on this new organization, the new, Karnišović and everybody else that's being brought in. If they don't have the kahunas to make some kind of change themselves, I think they're going to be losing some of the fan base.
Yeah, the fan base was re-energized by the fact that, after 17 years of the Gar-Pax regime, that they made a change. They're going to have a fresh look at the organization, a fresh look at the roster. The medical staff, scouting, everything is going to be supposedly given a fresh eyes looking at it and maybe revamp things. And then if you bring over the holdover coach, it's going to destroy a lot of the goodwill that you built up with this move to bring in Karnišović and Mark Eversley as the GM. They made some changes in the front office that are exciting, and we'll see what that's going to mean with the roster long term. But as you mentioned, the fan base wants to see change immediately. And if you're not going to change the roster because of everything that's happened with the pandemic, the assumption was you would certainly have a new head coach for next season.
Ryan Badgley, co-host of Draft on Tap here, and I love hearing Schanowski and Schuster talking hoops. Welcome to the network, fellas. And you know what I also love? The NFL draft. And one thing is certain in these uncertain times is that there will be a draft in 2021 come hell or high water. Another thing that is certain, the Barroom's lead draft analyst Danny Shimon and I are ready to get you primed for the 2021 draft by profiling dozens of players you, as a Chicago Bears fan, need to know about. So check out Draft on Tap on your Bears Barroom Radio Network podcast stream later this week. Now let's get back to Sharpshooters with Mark and David.
All right, let's talk about that roster. It's not good enough, obviously. There's some talent there. There's some young players there that still have room for growth. There are some young players that have been disappointing. There's some young players that have faults in their game, to be perfectly honest. But, when the last game was played, I believe the starting lineup was Zach LaVine, and Kobe White finally got into the starting lineup.
Start, yeah.
I still, I go along with Bill Winnington, who I was part of the broadcast with. We both believe that he's never going to be an NBA point guard. I know the game has changed. He's a scoring guard. That's what he is. That's what he's always been. So I think the Bulls still do need, in my estimation, I'm sort of old time about this, they do need a real point guard. But anyway, Zach LaVine and Kobe White were your starting backcourt. Wendell Carter Jr. in the middle, Lowry Markkanen, and I'm going to say Otto Porter Jr., even though he was coming off the bench. He would be in your starting lineup. So, that's an okay starting five. Lowry Markkanen had a very, very disappointing season. I still think he can be a pretty good player if the right person is able to get to him, I think. Otto Porter Jr. is just, for right now, just clogging up space when he's healthy. Wendell Carter Jr. is undersized. Zach LaVine isn't... He's a borderline all-star for a lot of reasons, and Coby White is going to be a really good player in the NBA. He's a Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams kind of player. I just don't think he's a point guard.
Well, you remember Ben Gordon was a point guard at Connecticut, and people thought that he could be a point guard in the NBA. And quickly we found out he was a lightning scorer off the bench. He was Sixth Man of the Year, I believe, as a rookie, the only player to do that.
Yep.
Coby White reminds me a lot of Ben Gordon. He's taller, obviously, and he can score in some different ways. He's faster end to end than Ben Gordon, but he's a guy that is going to be looking for his. He's not there to facilitate other players, and that used to be the primary role of a point guard, but that's changed so much in the last 10 years that guys like John Stockton and Steve Nash, those guys would be almost outdated in today's game. I mean, they'd still be good players, but they would have to play a lot differently than what they did back then. So I think Coby has got a really good future. He is an electric offensive player, and he's a good shooter. Initially I thought maybe that he was going to be one of these volume guys that wasn't going to be very efficient, but as the season went on, his percentages improved both from the field and from the three-point line, and I think he can be a really good scorer. Whether or not he's an ideal partner with Zach LaVine, you can debate that, but I think that in today's game, where a lot of times teams are playing three guards, I think they can make that work. I don't think they necessarily need to have a traditional point guard to make it work. They can run some offense through different guys, and I think that what they need to do going forward is get Lauri Markkanen more involved with the ball. Get him up to the mid-post, run some things off him, let him handle the ball. He's a willing passer. At 7 feet, he can see over the top of defenses. You can run some high-low stuff with him and Wendell. I think there's so many things in the offense that they didn't do, and I think there's a lot of potential there for growth. Hopefully they can add a good player in this draft, or maybe use that pick to make a trade for a veteran player that can give them some improvement immediately. But, Karnišović was pretty candid in saying that this team underachieved last season, which is another thing that makes you scratch your head. Then why do you not want to make a coaching change? But, he feels like there's talent on the roster, and I think, from the outside, him coming in from Denver, he's looking at a major market team that should have tons of cash to use to acquire talent, and has a good core of young talent. Obviously, they're not going to be great immediately, but it's a team that should be able to grow together and in 2 or 3 years be a really good team.
Well, the Bulls will have a ton of cash as soon as Otto Porter Jr. and his injuries go somewhere else. You mentioned earlier in the podcast, one of the small defects maybe in Giannis's game is that sometimes he falls too much in love with that three-point shot because, his bread and butter is more so towards the basket. Lauri Markkanen, part of his bread and butter game is obviously from the outside. He's definitely a stretch for power forward. I think where he falls into some kind of problems at times is like right off the bat at the beginning of games, he's settling for that three-point shot. And I'm a big believer. Again, I'm very old-fashioned. I do believe in the traditional point guard again. But I also believe that, if you're a talent, especially a 7-foot talent, you start with the layup and then you start moving outside. Because once you start, doing your game on the inside, they're going to give you that room from the outside. And I think he's got incredible talent and range from the outside. But I saw too many games where his first 5 or 6 shots were from the three-point line, and he wasn't on his game right off the bat. And I thought that really hurt him. I mean, if you remember the very first game, I think it's not last season, it's still this season, he had a really big game right off the bat. And I can't remember.
Something like 31 points, 17 rebounds against Charlotte.
Right. And he was going inside. And then in his next game, I can't remember who it was against, he was like 1 of 12 from the field or something ridiculous because he was settling for that outside shot. So again, I'm no NBA coach for sure, and I certainly don't know how to coach a big man's game, but I do know that he's got the talent to score inside, and he's got the advantages over guys that are smaller than him. So I'm a big believer, start your game inside, then move outside.
Well, remember how Luol Deng used to complain about how this offense has me standing in the corner and shooting threes? He didn't like the fact that he couldn't move and cut and try to get stuff going to the basket. Well, unfortunately, that's where Lowry found himself last season. In a lot of their sets, he was the weak side player who was told to spot up at the three-point line and wait for the ball to come to him. And when you have a 7-foot athlete who's really at his best when he's on the move, you're taking away so much of his potential talent to just say be a three-point shooter. And that wasn't the only way he was used. Boylan talked a lot about he wanted Lowry to be more aggressive on the defensive board and get the rebound and bring it all the way up the court and try to initiate offense that way. Yeah, that happens, a handful of times during a game. It's not going to be a staple of your offense. I think that they undervalued the way they could use him. I especially think they undervalued Wendell Carter. It got to the point, and again, for both of his seasons, he missed huge portions because of injuries. But it got to the point where Wendell would catch the ball in the mid-post, and he wouldn't even look at the basket.
Yeah.
And I think that's got to be a fundamental change in his mindset that coming into the new season, he has to think that, I was the 7th pick in the draft. I was a great player at Duke. I need to be more a part of this offense. And I think that the Bulls have to design a system where you've got 2 athletic big men. Let's make the most out of that.
Yeah, you talk about changes in the NBA, and obviously, in all sports, things change over time. And one of the big things that has changed in the NBA over the last, dozen to maybe 15 years is the big man in the middle. Wendell Carter is undersized. I think everybody agrees to that. He's probably only 6'9". He's definitely built up his body in the weight room and everything. But I just find if you're going against like a Karl Anthony Towns or Embiid or other guys of that ilk, Ayton also, he's undersized and he's at a disadvantage, and his offensive game, as you alluded to, is just not there as well. So ultimately, is he the answer in the middle? Do they have to look elsewhere? If they were lucky enough to get the number 1 pick, the kid from Memphis, what's his name, Wiseman?
James Wiseman, yeah.
I'd jump on him in a second.
7'1" athlete who can really move, who can be a force at the defensive end. Yeah, you mentioned about the need of a traditional point guard. I think they need more of a traditional center.
Okay.
Because Wendell has talked on several occasions to the media that he's playing out of position, that he feels at 6'9", he's not really ideally suited to defend some of the bigger centers in the league, and he feels like it also probably restricts what he can do at the offensive end. So I think if they were lucky enough to get one of the top 3 picks and Wiseman was on the board, that's who I would go for.
All right, we mentioned all the starters, and as we come to the conclusion of today's first ever Sharpshooters, Schanowski, and Schuster podcast, just talk about a few of the guys off the bench. I thought Thomas Satoransky, he started, he did the best he could. The year before in Washington, when he played against the Bulls, I thought he was really good, so I didn't have any problem with them signing him, and I still think he'll be valuable now in a role coming off the bench to settle down that second unit. Thaddeus Young, his future is not in Chicago. I think somehow, some way, I think he's going to be dealt. Daniel Gafford, I like him on the defensive end of the court. He definitely can dunk with the best of everybody.
He's a great backup center.
Yeah, he's a great backup center, and unfortunately, the same thing happened to him as happened to Wendell Carter in his rookie season. I mean, the refs were just going to call a foul every time he moved out there. Ryan Arcidiacono, I give him all the credit. He tries real hard. I don't know if he's good enough to be in the NBA. Shaq Harrison, he's got his plus points. And Denzel Valentine.
You skipped over the guy that Shaq Harrison is going to come in competition with. That's Chris Dunn. I
forgot about Chris Dunn.
I would bring back Shaq Harrison and let Chris Dunn walk.
Okay.
Because
that's a savings of money.
You look at Shaq Harrison, made about $1 million last year. Maybe you give him a small raise. I'm not going to give Chris Dunn, his qualifying offer went up because of the technicalities of the number of games played, that now instead of his number being around $5.5 million, it's like 7.1.
Yeah.
I think Shaq Harrison gives you a lot of the same things defensively that Chris Dunn, and people say, well, Chris Dunn was second in the league in steals. Yeah, he was. I'll give him that. He's a good on-ball defender. He can play the passing lanes. He's a very good defender, but it got to the point where opposing teams would not even guard him at the offensive, and they would play off him 7, 8, 9 feet and just clog up the paint. Shaq Harrison is not a great offensive player, but if you recall, late in the season, he was getting more minutes and he actually was making 3-point shots.
You're right.
So I would bring back Harrison and let Chris Dunn go.
Well, Chris Dunn is no longer a starter on this team on top of everything else, and you're not going to give $7 million to a guy coming off the bench who only protects the passing lanes, to be honest with you. Although he's a little bit more of a player. Denzel Valentine, he's definitely gone. I think he's wore his welcome out. Chandler Hutchinson, I don't know.
Always hurt.
He is always hurt, unfortunately. I think you saw a little bit of growth in him last season, especially going to the basket. He's got to do a lot more of that.
He had a
really
nice 10-game stretch or so before he got hurt again late in the season, where you saw that aggressiveness that was missing. Now, he's not a good outside shooter, and that's something he's going to have to work on, but I think there's still something there, especially if you bring him in a reserve role. They could have a pretty intriguing second unit, with a lot of good athletes, a lot of guys that can push the pace. It's just a question of getting maybe another veteran in here who can stabilize the core, because Thaddeus Young played a little bit better later in the season, but he seemed lost on this team. He had played with a good team in Indiana. He kind of bounced around the league. He was in Philadelphia and Brooklyn, probably a couple other teams I'm forgetting. But I just felt like, they brought him in for veteran leadership, and I'm sure he did a good job in the locker room trying to keep guys' spirits up and give them some pointers. But I think he's better served at this point in his career to be with a contending team where, his experience and his contributions can really affect winning more than he can with a rebuilding team.
I think they're going to do him a favor and and find him another team. Luke Cornett, 7 feet, and that's about it. He can shoot, and that's about it anyway. And then there's Cristiano Felicio to round it all out.
One more year, baby.
Stealing money, and he and Gar Foreman will go down in history as that was a botched job there.
I got a Chris Felicio story once.
Please.
I went to a Cubs game a couple of summers ago.
Happy-go-lucky guy, by the way.
Yeah, really nice guy. And I guess he goes to a lot of baseball games because, he's from Brazil and he has some interest in whatever he can find to do during the summer. He spends a lot of time here. And I was with my family, and we were in, I think it was Old Crow or one of the places down on Clark Street. And we were just enjoying our meal, and here comes Chris Felicio walking with a young lady, and I said hello. I don't think he knew who I was, but I bumped into a 6'10" Chris Felicio on a summer afternoon taking in a Cubs game. So, yeah.
Well, we wish him well.
He's got plenty of money. He should be well set for the rest of his life.
4 years, $32 million,
Correct.
And that was like a big waste. Anyway, Mark, this has not been a waste. I almost forgot.
A lot of fun.
I almost forgot that we were even doing this as a podcast because you and I have, whether in your back office at NBC Sports Chicago once upon a time, we would just sit and babble about talking about basketball. So
we've done this for so often for the last 30 years that it's great to actually bring this where people can consume it, and we hope that people will listen and subscribe, and this is going to be a lot of fun.
And also, I should throw this out there, and Aldo can, because I sometimes forget the number. If people want to ask us questions,
it'd be great. We'd love to do that.
The number is 224-202-6234. God, my memory, I'm half senile, but I actually remembered that one. If you want to ask a question of myself or Mark, anything regarding any kind of basketball, Mark is really, really, really an expert at everything basketball. I love talking basketball with you, Mark.
And we can talk more about the draft as we get into further episodes, because I know people are very intrigued on how can the Bulls try to raise the talent level just a little bit heading into the next season.
And like I said earlier in the podcast, we'll sprinkle in some guests every now and then. Stacy, Kendall, who knows? Maybe, like I said, maybe
we'll get Will on, Casey Johnson.
Absolutely. So, Mark, this has been a pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun, David. Look forward to doing this for the weeks to come.
Thanks, buddy.
All right.
Aldo Gandia here with a quick programming note. The Punky QB is coming to the barroom. Jim McMahon is Mike North's guest on the Mike North Advantage, right here on the Bears Barroom Radio Network.
Balls of steel. I got balls of steel. Yeah.